Major funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from New York Community Bank, M&T Bank, PBM, Customers Bank, Collins Building Services, AmTrust Title Insurance Company, Marks Paneth, Capital One Bank. Additional funding for these broadcasts has been provided by grants from Amerant Bank, Bank of America, Citizens Bank, Dime Community Bank, Douglaston Development Levine Builders, Flushing Bank, Friedman LLP, Handro Properties LLC Handler Real Estate Organization, Hodges Ward Elliott Inc., Investors Bank, James D. Kuhn Real Estate Institute at Syracuse University, John Catsimatidis Red Apple Group, Keysight Capital Partners, New Banks, Meridian Capital Group, Ocean First Bank, People's United Bank, RPW Group, TD Bank, and these friends. Serial entrepreneur, restaurateur, author, inventor. I have the one and only Stratus Morfogen today. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So tell me about the family, okay? Some of the family arrived at the end of the 19th century. Tell me about them.
Well, my granduncles, Paul, Sam, and Jimmy came back in the 1870s, 1880s. And then my grandfather joined them right at the turn of the century, early 1900s, 1901 or 1902. They came from a place, a little mountain village in Sparta. And they were working like, vegetable deliveries, working in the restaurant industry. And then in 1905 or so, we changed the name from Morphogenes to Morfogen because Morphogenes couldn't get a lease in the restaurant industry, but Morfogen had a better shot at it. So that's where they started with their first restaurant, which was called Pappas. And that was
1910?
1910, yeah. And that was on West 14th Street, right off 8th Avenue. And that's where they started the Morfogen legacy in the restaurant industry. Started in 1910 with Pappas, and it was my grandfather and his three brothers.
So let's fast forward. What happens next with the brothers?
Well, they basically had a tiger by the tail. The restaurant exploded, catered to all the presidents and all the mayors and the governors, politicians, who's who of industry, who's who of society. And Pappas became a staple in the culinary dining scene. It was actually there from 1910 to 1975. And basically, it closed down when all the grandparents all passed away. And the next generation had no interest in running it. So that Pappas had a 65-year legacy.
What about the Pappas of Sheepshead Bay?
So what happened is that when my grandfather and his brothers partnered with a guy named Chris Pappas, and then they had a breakup in early 1910-11, and Chris opened up Pappas of Sheepshead Bay, and my grandfather and his three brothers stayed on with Pappas on 14th Street. So they basically split it up. Morfogen's on one side, Chris Pappas went to Sheepshead Bay.
So wait, your grandfather's here, but then your father comes in 1945, right?
He comes right after the war, 1946, 47, and he moves to Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. And there he starts working at Pappas as, he works his way up from a busboy, waiter, bartender. And he really became close with my granduncle Paul, who was really the founder of Pappas. He was the ringleader. He was the one with the drive and the ambition, and the other brothers just followed along. And my father had a click with him. And it's funny, everybody in my family says, from Paul to my father John to me, we were pretty much the same types. Always interested in making a deal, always interested in moving our industry, moving ourselves forward. in business, society, philanthropy, and everything else that we've been accustomed to doing the last three generations.
What happens in 1956? He raised $15,000 for this Chelsea Chop House.
Yeah, so he raised $15,000, Chelsea Chop House, and they opened on where London Pharmacy is today, because we actually sold the lease to them in 1981. It was a very sad day in my life when I was 13 years old, because I loved that restaurant. And that's where the Chelsea House began in 1956. And from there, he opened 5 more Chelsea Houses. And then he had other restaurants like King of the Sea, South Shore Manor, Hilltop Diner, Golden Reef Diner. I could say it was a traditional Greek family where there was never enough and we always wanted more.
Now, what happened? Who was the pitch man for American Express?
So my father was quite ambitious and actually an advocate, which I like to think I take something from him. And in the late 50s, the unions tried to muscle him out because my father didn't believe that we're in the hospitality industry. When guests are in the dining room, we need to service them. We need to work when our guests are off. But the union would say, it's time to take a break. So my father kicked the unions out, and it was actually documented in the New York Times. I think it was 1958. And there that's when people say, oh, look, when you go into a restaurant, they're all Greeks. It actually started because, after my father kicked everybody out, he brought his cousins in, he brought his uncles and his nephews and everybody into work. And at that time, my 2 other uncles were coming back from Korea, and the 3 brothers got together and started their empire. That's where the Chelsea House empire started.
What about the Hilltop Diner?
In the early 70s, my dad was the first pitchman from American Express. And I can recite the whole radio advertisement. And we were really proud because that was unheard of in the 70s. A small mom and pop restaurateur that had 9 restaurants at the time doing commercials for American Express. And that was a really exciting moment for our family because there we just took a mom and pop restaurant all of a sudden is on the national scene. That was my father. He was always a go-getter, always changing the game. And and the Hilltop Diner, basically, that was the end of his career, Hilltop Diner. He opened that in 1988 and he finished the lease in 2005. But he never stopped until the end. Work was part of his life.
So in 1967, Stratus is born, Bayside, Queens, correct?
Yeah,
Jamaica
Bayside,
Hospital.
Queens, Jamaica Hospital. You're all correct.
So as I was saying, your teacher considered you had AHDD?
ADHD.
Okay. So they thought you weren't the best student. But your father has a good story. He says invites them to the restaurant. Tell me this
Yes.
story.
So I think I was around 10 years old. The teachers brought in my father saying that we feel that Stratus has a learning disability and we need to see how we can get him extra help. And my father's sitting there with his old Greek attitude, like listening, really? My son has a learning disability. And I had ADHD, which was, something that people didn't know back then what it was. I actually think it's an asset, and I think it actually helps you multitask at a high level. And thank God I never got it medicated. But with that said, my father says to them, hey, listen, guidance counselor, principal, vice principal, teachers, everybody's in that room. And I remember it like yesterday. And he goes, you know what? What I want you to do, I want you to come with your significant other spouses and what have you, said in a very deep Greek accent. This Friday night, I'm going to hold a table for 8 of you at the Chelsea House in Bellerose. That's where my son is a busboy. I want you to see my son running the whole 200-seat dining room as a busboy, going through all the tables, talking to the guests, recommending what they should eat tonight, and actually basically holding court and controlling the whole dining room, as well as a manager. The only reason why he's not a manager, he's 10 years old. And I'd like you to see what he does on the floor. And you tell me if he has a learning disability. And my father just went like this. I'm done with this nonsense. Start teaching things that kids might enjoy. You might capture their attention. But I really like you to come this Friday night, and I'd like you to see him in action. And my father said, thank you for wasting my time. And he walked out. And that's the kind of support I got from my dad, that, you know what, learning is, to someone with ADHD, you're only interested in engaging when you can focus on it, and it's part of enjoyment. If it's calculus and physics and algebra, I have no interest. And with ADHD, it doesn't work. And I always had my dad's support with that. And it's unfortunate that teachers don't know how to handle it, even at a young age.
So what happens later on? Talk about the Kids Kingdom Amusement in Medford, young
Yeah,
age.
so I worked with my dad till about 18, 19 years old. And I was always, motivated to go further and further. I basically saw this amusement park being developed in Medford, Long Island. And I said, Dad, I want to jump into being an entrepreneur. So he lent me some money. And basically, it was like a Nathan-style restaurant, part of an amusement park in Medford, Long Island. And he fronted me about $35,000 to start it. It was a going business. It was doing about $7,000 a week in sales when I took it over. I turned it immediately into, it was one of those like Nathan style where the kids were basically birthday parties and people on stilts and clowns and whatever. But I turned it over right away into a teen disco on Friday, Saturday night with unlimited pizza. I kept my nephew at the front door getting $20 a head. And all of a sudden, from $7,000 a week in sales, I was doing $30,000 a week in sales. And I thought that was all the money in the world because I was making money hand over fist. I gave back my dad's investment. And I was living a pretty charmed life at 18, 19-year-old, owning Kids Kingdom Party Palace Amusement Park.
So what happens later on? You get involved with Hilltop again, right now, and there was the New York Times article, chef, New York Times or the Daily News, I'm not sure. The chef in the cool diner.
Yeah. So what happened was, after I sold Kids Kingdom, I flipped it, I sold it. My dad said, "Hey, I want to come back. I want to work together with you again at Hilltop." And I said, under only certain situation, I'll come back. I need culinary control. Because if we're going to do cheeseburgers and eggs and pancakes, I really have no interest. And to make a long story short, I recruited Gabriel Moran. He was the chef of a restaurant called Van Dam, which I was a big fan of. And with that, he was a 3-star New York Times chef. And my father's like, he was going nuts. How are you putting a New York Times chef in a diner in Queens? I said, we have to think outside the box, Dad. The only way I'm going to stay here is that if we can do something good, do something different, and not the status quo. And I give him credit because he let me do it. And then the New York Times picked it up. Daily News put us on the cover of the magazine, how 2 generations are fighting on what the Greek diner should be. And it was pretty cool. And it was the only diner in the early 90s that you needed a reservation for Friday and Saturday night. And it just went gangbusters. I had a New York Times chef doing pasta, fish, and salads only in a traditional 24-hour Greek diner.
So at the age of 26, the Gotham City Diner, 2nd Avenue and 81st Street.
And here I am, I get bored pretty quickly. So I took Gabriel Moran as Hilltop Diner was flourishing. I said, let's bring it to New York City. And that's what we did, Gotham City Diner on 81st Street and 2nd Avenue. And that was my entree into New York City dining, which I fell in love with. It's hard to go to Manhattan and do something at that level and then go back to Queens.
Let's talk about the nightclub, because the nightclub in the New York Post article with Madonna is an interesting tour.
So my entree to New York dining was Gotham Diner. My entree to the New York press, I should say the national press, started in June '94 when I opened up my nightclub Rouge, and that was the old Jimmy Weston's on 54th and Park. And I became a press darling by accident. It was the actual birthday party of David Koch, the energy conglomerate, and that was the preview party to the opening of my new nightclub. And it was a black tie event. It was the who's who of Fifth Avenue, Park Avenue. It was a closed down event. And I told security, hey, I have a lot of cousins. I have like 60 first cousins. When they come, if they try to come in tonight, it's closed because it's Mr. Koch's birthday party and that's it. So it was the Nextel. My Nextel starts ringing, come to the front. I'm the only one that can make this call. And at that point, I said, no one's allowed in, continuously come to the front. I go to the front. I see a young black man, I see a blonde white girl with a Yankee hat and a bomber jacket. They're dressed in jeans and t-shirts, and that's not what's going to happen while everybody's black tie inside. I looked at them and I said, they're not coming in. And I went back to where I was holding court in the back of the nightclub. And nobody would tell me who it was. They were just like dumbfounded that they all assumed that I knew who it was, and I didn't. I mean, at that point, the only celebrity that I had ever heard of in Garden City was Susan Lucci. From all my children, I didn't know celebrities. I'm just a kid from Garden City at that time. And so then the next day in the press, New York Post, I think it was page 2 or 3, says headline: "New kid on the block rejects Tupac and Madonna." And at that point, because I didn't understand the love affair with the press, I didn't understand. I actually thought that my business was out of business. Like, how could I do this? I'm so stupid. And obviously, understanding press, which was my first lesson, it became a global press story that, wow, this club rejected the hottest dating couple at the time. And then she returned. She came back, and we became kind of friends at the time. And Rouge was on the map as like one of the hardest places to get into, and it was all by mistake.
Let's talk about 1997 and the internet. Not too many people were involved, and not too many people know about your story with the internet.
Yeah, so in 1996 and 97, I started reading about what this thing called the internet could be. And I love catalog business. I love those Omaha steaks and the legal seafoods. I love those concepts. And I started understanding, wow, the internet, wow, all computers connected. This could be really interesting. And at that point, I was not tech savvy at all. I had to look under the mouse to see that there was a ball under there. I never used really computers ever. In my work, social, personal business, what have you. So I started saying, wow, this thing is really cool. I said, what I'd like to do is do like a digital brochure with this thing called the internet and bring the Fulton Fish Market online. So I started working it out of my apartment. And then from there, we jumped into a little warehouse in Long Island City. I started buying up a lot of keywords. People didn't know what keywords were at the time, but I was buying steaks, lobster, gift giving on Excite, Yahoo, and AOL on their search engines. This is before Google. And I was buying keywords. All of a sudden, 5 or 6 orders came in of lobster tails, king crab legs, shrimp, crab cakes. And I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. I kept on buying keywords. And what I was doing, I was sitting in my little office responding to every customer on my AOL server. And I was saying, thank you, Mrs. Jones, for your order. Blah, blah, blah. Everything was done by me and one other helper. But to the outside, except for the AOL server, people thought it was a real company. And then Patricia Seabold picked up on it. And she was writing a book called Customers.com. And she was doing a study on Amazon, Southwest Airlines, Wells Fargo, and a couple of other companies on how great their customer service is. Well, she added little FultonStreet.com in there with 2 employees with those other huge companies. And that's what we got on the map. We got on the map for customer service. Because I believe that the idea is to break down that screen and let the customer feel, because there was a lot of anxiety when you were ordering in the 90s, 96, 97, 98, about putting your credit card on and ordering through a screen. So we would just knock down that screen by sending a personalized email. Thank you, Mrs. Jones, for your order. I'm your representative. Whatever you need, don't hesitate to contact me. All of a sudden, we started building this thing, and hundreds of orders started coming in, and we had a real business. And then what happened was I got a call from Jim McCann from 1-800-Flowers, and he got mad at me because I bought the word flowers on AOL, Excite, and Yahoo. And he had the presumption that he thought that he owned those words. And I said, you don't own those words. You own 1-800-Flowers. You don't own the word flower. So make a long story short, we go and we sit down and talk to him at his office in Westbury. I said, listen, I'm not going to fight with you, but your marketing department is sleeping. Because, I grabbed this with a 2-person operation. I grab words that are so in tune with your business. I said, you know what? And then you take it out on me. This is the only way I'm going to give you the words back. I want a subsite, FultonStreet.com. I want that subsite on 1-800-Flowers.com. I want it on your homepage. And once it's on your homepage, let's do something for Father's Day, because it's probably the weakest holiday that you have. let's do a surf and turf with crab cakes and lobster tails and some steaks and a Peter Luger steak sauce and lobster bisque soup. Let's do a Father's Day gift package. And I'll tell
Okay.
you, he agreed to it, and we had tractor trailers outside for basically 2 weeks leading up to Father's Day.
Stratus, with 7 minutes left, I have so much to get on. Let's briefly talk about your relationship with the Philip Chow, and then let's talk about the current day.
Okay. So in 2005, I met with Chef Philippe Chow, and we basically partnered up, and we created Philippe Restaurant on the Madison and 60th. It was an overnight sensation. It exploded. And with that, we basically opened 5 more restaurants around the country. And I owned Philippe Chow from 2005 to 2014. And then I split up with the second generation of partners who bought out my original founding partners.
Okay, what happens next?
At that point, I took a few years off. I did some consulting. I had a 3-year non-compete. In 2017, I met with Robert Cummins, who was a partner of mine, and Dave Thomas. And they said, hey, we've got this great place in FiDi, and we're thinking about doing like a Caribbean type restaurant. And I said, I want to bring back my father's chop house, but I want to do it my way. Because when I went to a chop house where my wife doesn't eat fish and vegetables, I'm eating a big steak and she's having cream of spinach and a baked potato. I want to create LSD. I want to do salt and pepper ginger lobster with that dry aged porterhouse by Pat LaFrida, 35 days, married to Peking duck. LSD, lobster, steak, and duck, the ultimate surf and turf. And that's where I created Brooklyn Chop House. And then when it came down to the appetizers, I said, let's do a pastrami dumpling. Let's do a bacon cheeseburger dumpling. And hence Brooklyn Chop House exploded right on the scene and breaking every number per square foot in the US because I married Chinese with an American steakhouse.
Well, let's talk about the expansion of Brooklyn Chop House, and then we'll go to the dumpling.
So Brooklyn Chop House during COVID, I'm very proud of my team. We donated about 8,400 meals to 16 hospitals, 3 police departments, and even a nursing home on Mother's Day. And with that, there were a lot of opportunities. And with the opportunities, landlords were hitting me up on a weekly basis. Would you take this location? Take this location. I'll write you a check. And my answer was no. Nothing was going to make me interested. There was nothing that was going to move my speed to say, hey, let's do a deal. Then when James Famularo called me and he said, hey, bro, you got to see this one. And I said, what is it? It's Buffalo Wild Wings on 47th and Broadway. They put about $15 million into it 5 years ago. Friedlands love you because they remember what you did at Philippe and they always wanted to be in business with you. They went to Brooklyn Chop House. They thought Brooklyn Chop House blew away anything that you did at Philippe. They wanted to do a deal with you. Out of respect to the Friedlands and Famularo, I went and did a walkthrough. And to my amazement, I'm looking at a $15 million, 25,000 square foot restaurant in Times Square. And Mike, you have to understand, those deals are not meant for little guys like me. Those deals are meant for public companies. You're talking about the heart of Times Square, 25,000 feet, 660 seats. But the Friedlands, I give them a lot of credit because they wanted to do a deal with me. And they made it so easy. They're like, what do you want? This is back in May 2020. So it was a lot of uncertainty at the time. And not too many people were doing deals, especially this size. So I met with the Friedlands and I said, this is what I need. I need an 8% lease. I need it to be capped at $1 million. I need about $1 million in TI and rent credits. If that's something you're interested in with a 20-year lease, and a COVID clause, anything that business interruption will not cover, that sometime in the future, any of these politicians that act like businessmen shut down the economy again, that my lease reverts to 8% of my sales. I was done with that last part.
So talk about the dumplings.
So with the success of the dumplings at Brooklyn Chop House, I decided I want to do a 2-ounce sandwich shop. My partner's like, what? 2-ounce sandwich shop? I said, yeah, what I want to do is I want to do a dumpling shop. And what I really want to do is I want to bring the Horn and Hardart automat back. Because I believe if you load the history of Horn and Hardart, it's a fascinating history. They were doing up to 800,000 meals a day. They exploded after the Spanish flu. And what happened was in the 70s, after 60, 70-year run, technology killed the automat. And I said, you know what? If technology killed the automat, and to me, it's the most cost effective, efficient way to deliver a product. With technology today and driverless cars, it's time to bring the automat back. Mike, this was a year before COVID. I didn't do this for safety reasons. I did this for efficiency and economics only. So when I wrote the plan, signed my first lease in January 2020, and we were off to the races about doing 30 so dumplings of like sandwiches, peanut butter and jelly, bacon cheeseburger, lamb gyro, all things that you could imagine as a sandwich. I made it into a dumpling. And that was Brooklyn Dumpling Shop. And how we're going to deliver it? With a staff of 4, I can do over 500 servings a day in a 12-hour period using technology and using the automat control from your smartphone. And that just exploded on us.
Last comment tell me about your wife and the kids.
My wife is in the fashion business. She was at Harper's Bazaar. Liz Tiberius was one of her mentors. She then went to Allura, and 7-8 years she was at Vogue magazine. My eldest daughter is at university at Miami. She's a senior this year, Natalie. And B and Isabel are in Southampton High School.
You know, as I started the show, a serial entrepreneur, then you became an author.
Yeah, so when I started doing the dumplings, Macmillan Publishing came at me and said, hey, we can't believe that someone hasn't taken a sandwich and made it into a dumpling. You need to write the book. And I wrote Damn Good Dumplings.
Hey, you've had an interesting life. I'm really happy that you're my guest today on Building New York.
Michael, you're a legend, and it's an honor to be on your show.